Welcome back. If this is your first time of visiting my YouTube channel, please don't forget to click the like and subscribe button so that you get the latest updates. Today we'll be talking about CSS, what CSS is and how you can apply CSS to your HTML document. Alright, so by default, your HTML document and your browser apply a default style to your HTML document. So those styles are how your browser get to like style your HTML document so that they have like a default style. Like this, your heading one is having like a default style which is bold, and there are other CSS properties that is styled to you. So let me show you the default style that your browser apply to your HTML document. So if we inspect your H1, you see that we have display block, which is a property, and the value is block. We have font size, we have margin block, etc. Right? These are like the default style that your browser apply to it. And if you look at this right hand corner, you see user agent style sheets. Right? This is the style that your browser is called user agent, that your browser apply to your HTML documents by default. So let me show you how you can add CSS to your HTML document. We have three methods of adding CSS to your HTML document. The first method is called the inline method, which you come to the first or the opening tag of your HTML element and apply an HTML attribute called style, right? Then inside the style value, which we wrap in a quote, you put your CSS property column, the value. Let's say color, right? I want to give this heading one HTML element a red color. So I'll say color, which is the CSS property, and the value is red. So I'm saying apply CSS property with value red to this HTML document. So when I save, you see that the HTML document automatically changed to the HTML element automatically changed to red, right? So that's like one way of adding CSS to your HTML document. The second way is by coming to your head section and add a style tag. In between the style tag, that is where you now write your HTML, your CSS code. So I'll just say H1 and I'll apply a font size of, let's say, 3 rems, right? 3 rems. So that's how you add. This is the second method of you adding your CSS to your HTML document. While the third method is by creating an external style sheet, which is an CSS file. Then you now use your link tag to link it to this your HTML document. So let me come here and create a new CSS style. So I'll just call this my main.css. Don't forget to add the .css extension to that file. So after creating it, then I'll now apply a style by using the element selector. I will explain what an element selector is, and say a background color of let me go with Dodger blue, right? Save. Then as you see, it's not like it's automatically applying the style to your HTML document, right? So you now need to come to your HTML document and link that CSS file. How do you do that? You now come here and say, using the link element, and say link, right? So you say link rel means what type of document are you linking to this HTML document, right? We call it a style sheet document. While your href, which is the reference to the file that you want to add to the HTML document, which is by default it creates, by when you're creating it, it puts like a default name of style, but the file name we created is not style, is main.css. So that's the name we're going to use. So I will say main.css, right? And as you can see now, the Dodger blue, which is the background color applied to the body of our document, is already taking effect, right? Those are the three ways you can add CSS to your document. So let's now go down to defining what CSS is and how you can write CSS, and what are the types of CSS selectors we have, and how you can structure your CSS declaration. Alright, so let me start by, I will have to remove this guy here so that we'll not have that Dodger blue, and also I will remove this inline style. Right, yes. So I will always advise you to write your styles in either the head section or in an external file, right? Because it just helps you to have like a cleaner HTML document where you have your HTML and you have your CSS in a different section. All right, okay. So, but that have effect, and I will explain the effects of you doing your style in that way. So let's start by defining what CSS is. CSS is a cascading style sheet, right? It's a style sheet language which you use in describing the presentation of your HTML, right? So the way you write your CSS, like this form which we've written this style for this our H1 element, is known as syntax, right? So the pattern is you write your CSS selector first. As you can see, when I over on it, it's already telling me that the selector, and it's telling me the specificity. I will explain what specificity is. All right. So your selector, right? Your selector is the first thing here, right? And we have different type of selector. While after you write your selector, the next is the curly brace. You always put this in the curly brace, except you're using like a preprocessor that can also help you not to put this curly brace. So right. So you have your curly brace. So in between your curly brace, that's where you now have your CSS property and your CSS value. Don't forget to add your semicolon. If not, it will end up messing up your CSS styles, right? Some of the styles that you apply will move to the next element. You get. All right. So this is the form, or this is the way you write your CSS, which is known as syntax. So your syntax is how you write a particular language. It's called syntax. All right. Now let me explain the types of selector we have. Then we'll talk about few CSS properties as we go further. So types of selector, we have different type of selector. So I'll start with the first one. We have what we call the element selector. The element selector is the way CSS use the name of HTML elements to target that element and apply style to them. All right. So for example, H1 is an HTML element, right? And we want to target it. We already have H1 here, and we want to target this H1 and give it a style, right? We want to change the color of this text. So I will say H1, which is the CSS way of selecting H1 document that we are describing right now, by saying select the H1 element and apply the font size of 3 rems. Right? I can also change the color, so you can add more than one CSS property to a particular element that you've targeted already. So let me add color to this, and I'll say red here. So that's how you write your element selector. The next one is your ID selector. And how do you write your ID selector? You start by putting the hash symbol and the name of the ID, right? An ID, just like unique identity, right? So I'll give it the name. Let me say passport, right? And have my curly brace. Then inside I can write whatever CSS property I want to apply to that element. So for me to be able to see the effect, I have to now come to my HTML document and apply the ID attribute to the element I want to select and give it the name, which I have here called passport. So I'll come to my H1 and apply an HTML attribute called ID, and the value, I'll equate the value to be passport. So this way, I'm using my CSS to say select any HTML element that have the ID attribute that is equal to passport. Then I will apply whatever style I want to apply. So let me apply, there's a CSS property called border. Then don't worry, we'll talk about CSS properties. So I just want us to see how you see. As you can see, I've already targeted this HTML element and I apply border to it. So the next way for you to add CSS to target your CSS HTML element is by using class. So how do you write a class selector? You start by applying a dot notation first, symbol or notation, either one you want to call it, and the name of the class, right? So before you do that, I always advise you to come here and apply the attribute class first, which is class here, and the value you want that class to be, right, which is the name of the class. I'll say let the name of the class be main, right? So after applying the HTML attribute class and giving it a value of main, I'll now come here and say let me target this HTML element using the name of the class called main. So you start by applying your dot notation and the name of the class, which is main, then with your curly brace, and apply whatever property you want to apply to it. So I'll just do a background color of green, right? As you can see. Alright, so the next CSS selector we'll be talking about is called the universal selector. So how do you write a universal selector? How do you target the HTML document using this universal selector? You use the star, or you can call it asterisk, right? And your curly brace, right? This star means select all HTML elements. So this will select all the HTML elements in your HTML document and apply whatever style you have in between here. So I will apply a padding of 0 pixel. Padding is also a CSS property, and margin also. So we will talk about those CSS properties later. So I've applied padding and margin. As you can see, it has moved up because by default it has a margin applied to it. The H1 have a margin applied to it. Alright. The next CSS selector we'll be talking about is called the pseudo selector, right? The pseudo selector, how do you write the pseudo selector? You write the elements you want to target using either the class or the ID method, then you apply a column, then with the name of the pseudo class that you want to apply to that HTML element, right? So we say, let's say since we already have, let's use our first element selector, which is element selector. I'll say H1, then I'll apply column to it, and I'll now say over, right? Over is an event that you perform on your HTML elements, right? So I'll show you that. So I'll say when you over on H1, I want you to change the color to white. Let's white. Let's do white. Let's do white, right? So anytime I over on this on my H1, it you see, as you can see the color. So the over action is when you move your mouse on top of the HTML element, right? So this is how it works. All right, so let's come back to our HTML document. So the next, there's another selector called so we've talked about H1 elements, we talked about ID class. We also have what we call the sibling selector, which it will be kind of complicated for now, but I'll leave it later in the future. We'll talk about those. But for now, these are the selectors you need to know for you to be able to write a good CSS and to also write good presentation of your HTML document. So thank you. Stay tuned. Don't forget to click the like and subscribe button so that you get the next video, which I'll be talking about CSS properties, CSS to your HTML document. No, we can just even talk about the 3 ways before describing those things. So yeah, so let me start from the beginning again. This guy.